Hello and welcome to Moneylife. This is Sucheta Dalal. This week we are naturally talking about IndiGo, or the airline that didn't go and triggered such mindless chaos across the country. People missing weddings, funerals, senior citizens staying with one cup of tea for 36 hours. The agony was mind boggling. And guess what? This is not the first time it's happened. It is the third and of course the biggest, because Indigo is much bigger than the other two times. A private airline can hold the country to ransom, can hold the civil aviation ministry to ransom, and the fastest way for it to get the government to roll back policies is not by lobbying, but by holding passengers hostage. And that's exactly what played out in the last few days. Planes were grounded, chaos unleashed in a deliberate manner, whatever the airline may say, and the government, acutely embarrassed during an international state visit, caved in, blinked first because it was a systemic collapse. But why did this happen? Because the union government and the civil aviation ministry and the civil aviation regulator, the DGCA, was sleeping on the job, have not learned from the past. Whole script has been played out twice before. You should have been 10 times prepared, but you were not. And that is why Indigo could hold people to ransom and blackmail the government. So let's look at history because that's the only way it makes sense. 2011-12, Kingfisher ran up dues of 7,000 crores to public sector banks, threatened job losses, was lobbying and lobbying for more loans, moratorium, bailouts, or evergreening as we like to call it. And it was happening. In fact, the government of the day played along. They were arm twisting banks to lend more money until, of course, chaos happened. And then they are nowhere on the scene. We have written about it before. In fact, there was a civil aviation minister who we have quoted in an article, there's a link here, who was insisting that banks must lend to the company since it cannot be allowed to close down, doesn't matter what. Okay. There was one suicide. People suffered untold losses, and the losses are not about the plane ticket, mind you. You're going for a purpose, whether it's a wedding, a funeral, maybe a concert where you're participating, maybe an important business meet. All those costs are not even talked about. People are grateful if taxes are not deducted or other charges are not deducted. It is not about the ticket, and those losses are never ever compensated. Did the government learn from Kingfisher? No way. In 2018-19, Jet Airways did the same dance again. Employee marches, talk about national asset. And what happened finally? Like Kingfisher, quiet burial. Jet Airways also collapses. Banks are left holding the baby. Huge losses. Passengers never compensated. Again, more recently, Go First just grounded itself overnight in 2023, talking about engine issues, while it had all its aircraft on wet lease, so the lessors kept fighting about who owns them. Now, June 2025, again there was a warning. Less than 6 months ago, Air India had a crash at Ahmedabad, safety concerns, whole bunch of planes were grounded, and there was chaos, right? Government should have known at that time. Everybody who understood anything about business and definitely civil aviation talked about bad policies, talked about the need to change, talked about a flawed system that allowed a duopoly. Nothing changed. This time, the hostage taker is different. Interglobe Aviation, which runs Indigo, did not merely threaten disruption of the system, it is the system. In fact, two-thirds of India's domestic market, or 65%, is Indigo. And with that kind of dominance, there are no shock absorbers. So the pain that it inflicted was enormous, far higher than Kingfisher, because when Kingfisher collapsed, yes, there was pain for a few days, market adjusted. When Jet died, Indigo itself jumped in to fill those slots. Now, when Indigo is stumbled, there's nobody else. The Tatas are still struggling with Air India. So there's nobody to fill the gap. The government is trying to do things, or at least says after having slept on the job, woken up, and now is threatening stringent action. Well, we'll wait and see. But Indigo has to learn that it has made a horrific miscalculation It cannot hold the public and the country to ransom, and there have to be serious consequences. If we are any kind of a nation with an administration and a system, there have to be serious consequences. The crisis, remember, hit at the worst possible time. It's peak wedding season. Winter is high tourism time. People come from abroad, and it is a high time for entertainment events all over the country because it's cool, it's not raining, it's not summer. We had a state visit. The scale of disruption was without precedent. And yet, the official response was not enforcement, it was surrender. Why? Oh, we have to get the system back first. Let's punish people afterwards. Whatever. We're waiting. The Director General of Civil Aviation, the regulator, has temporarily suspended the implementation of safety regulations for IndiGo alone. 6 months earlier, you had a crash. Now we are suspending safety regulations, which IndiGo has not put in place. The trigger for all of this is what is called Flight Duty Time Limitation Rules, FDTL. These are basic safety regulations that cap night flying hours and mandate 48 hours weekly rest for pilots. Why is this important? Because you remember, after a crash, it's so easy to blame pilots. You cannot overwork them, you have to give them rest. These norms are not Indian, they are global. They were proposed in 2019 after fatigue related risks were flagged after two cases, Mangalore and Kozhikode accidents. The airlines lobbied and lobbied, as happens in India, delayed it from 2019. There are lots of excuses, COVID and what have you, till finally, 19 months ago, the government set a non negotiable deadline, 1st November 2025. 1st November, mind you, 18 months ago, everybody knew it. Air India, Akasa, as new as it is, SpiceJet, as sickly as it is, complied with the rules, got additional pilots, and did their rostering accordingly. Indigo did not. Why? It's too big. Despite having the largest fleet, deepest cash reserves, highest market share, Indigo neither hired at scale nor trimmed capacity. In fact, if insiders are to be believed, they actually cut costs, saying that if you're going to fly less, you will get paid less, and they didn't hire more. Internal communications also suggest that senior management was aware what's going to happen as early as March 2025. So the failure to comply was not an accident. It was a calculated gamble that the government would not dare enforce safety rules against a near monopoly because it will embarrass the nation. The government did not, thankfully, act in time. Actually, it's so difficult to say because when heart goes out to people who suffered, and the suffering has been huge. But because there was a meltdown and there's a chronology to it, it reveals Indigo's machinations, and this is all documented in stock exchange filings. So I looked at those. 3rd December is when it all started. Indigo blamed disruptions primarily on minor technology glitches, winter fog, and then makes a passing reference to the implementation of updated crew rostering rules, that is FDTL, having compounded issues. But hello, you knew it 18 months ago, right? This is the same thing that it has said in reply to the DGCA notice. Okay, 4th December, the exchanges now ask Indigo to clarify media reports, an Economic Times report, about a probe by the DGCA. The company says it's not aware of any probe. 5th December, 1,000 cancellations in a single day, highest in Indian aviation history. Again, it is the exchange that is responding to media reports and demanding clarifications. Nothing proactive from Indigo. 6th December, it replies, and you know what it blamed. So they have a recorded video of the CEO. 6th December, there's actually a show cause notice, and Indigo's chief executive officer says that we formed a 4-member committee, and the government quietly grants an exemption until 10th February 2026. All this time, the board is quiet. Meanwhile, we are asking and tweeting saying, where is this illustrious silent board? That's when 7th December, finally, the board, which had kept quiet for all 5 days, issued a release saying that the directors had been meeting regularly from day one, and there was a crisis management group that had been formed, which included independent directors. Now, to my mind, and I understand a bit about corporate governance rules, All these personal meetings, informal meetings are never documented. We don't know what happens. We don't know whether anyone's held responsible. We don't know what anyone said. A board meeting, on the other hand, is formal. So there should have been an emergency board meeting that was called, which is a formal meeting whose deliberations and decisions have to be documented, recorded, and released to investors under the distinct regulations of stock exchanges, none of which has happened as yet. We are supposed to be satisfied with press releases, with published apologies. And remember, I'm talking about 9 December. The story is virtually off the front pages because IndiGo is a big advertiser, and even apologies are advertisements, right? So, three issues now, which shows systemic failure on Indigo's part. First, why is it brazen? Regulatory capture happens over and over again where you have this kind of dominance and you're a duopoly and you've been flying high. Air India, with a 25-30% market share, has been having its share of issues. You think that the DGCA and the Ministry of Civil Aviation will dance to your tune. And they come out as clueless. They come out as clueless about whether they were monitoring Indigo's preparations to comply. Safety regulations are not discretionary. They are statutory instruments under the Aircraft Rules 1937. So, a 6-month reprieve to one operator while other airlines comply creates an unlevel playing field and endangers flight safety. Okay, we are giving them time, saying it's all temporary, if the government is willing to act decisively. And we do not want rhetoric from the minister. We want to see action which goes beyond show cause notices. So DGCA here chose to prioritize short-term operational stability. Yes, it was required over long-term safety and its own credibility, which is still a question mark, and the jury is out there. The question is, will it act decisively after things stabilize? The regulator's own data shows Indigo operating with the lowest pilot to aircraft ratio among major aircraft carriers for 18 months. So 18 months ago, you should have been cracking the whip. The inaction during the build-up, followed by the panicked waiver, is a textbook case of regulatory forbearance morphing into regulatory capture. Now, employee whistleblowers are putting it all out about how the DGCA looked away. In fact, journalists are publishing photographs of people who they say should have been on the job but are so close to Indigo that they not only looked away while Indigo did not comply, but they looked away when Indigo was throttling competition. And there's data out there about how it used to supply additional resources the minute a new airline tried to get a destination. All this points to a second issue, which is the dangers of duopoly. We've been writing this. I have done a video blog and a column after the Air India crash in June 2025, but no lessons have been learned. India's civil aviation policy itself is largely to blame for a perverse structure where we have built hundreds of airports which don't get used because you don't have the aircraft to land over there, but we do not fix structural issues. Remember, this is a huge market. We are the third largest market in the world. India's domestic market is something people would vie for. And there are lots of industries with deep pockets. Why are they not getting into aviation? Because it's a mess of political lobbying, bad policies, a monopoly handling airports, and absurd taxes. So we have extremely high air turbine fuel taxes, which account for 40 to 45% of operating costs, which get worsened by the weak rupee, which has just been collapsing to over 90. And you have to import this turbine fuel. Airport charges are among the highest in the world. DGCA itself does not even have the staff to do its job. So it's chronically understaffed, and I'm not saying this was told to Parliament. And every time there's an aviation crisis, these fault lines are pointed out, written about by experts. Nothing changes. And the time is not short. We're talking about decades. I'm going back to Kingfisher, remember, 2011-12. The third is governance issues within Indigo. So Indigo's board reads like a governance hall of fame. Remember Satyam? Chairman Vikram Singh Mehta, former civil servant Amitabh Kant, Delta President Greg Statsky, M. Damodaran, former SEBI chairman, now a governance evangelist. 5 days of silence. Even today, not a peep from the board. All of them say it's not our job to talk. It is your job to talk. That is why we have independent directors. Otherwise, this whole charade of corporate governance needs to be thrown out of the window. If the board insists it's not their job, they will not come out in the open. They have got it wrong. Otherwise, do away with corporate governance, which is a lot of bureaucracy and three committees, and I was on one of them. All this amounts to a triple failure: regulatory failure, policy failure, governance failure. And in totality, it's been staggering. 3 lakh passengers directly affected, lakhs more indirectly, no statutory compensation framework, people still running around to get refunds. Not everyone has the luxury of booking again and again. And of course, like I keep repeating, returning the airfare is not compensation, it's not even fairness. So 5,000 to 10,000 goodwill gestures by the company will also be discretionary and taxable. Refunds are still being fought over. This is nonsense. The government hasn't spoken about it in spite of the pressure. Mohan Murthy has this very interesting post on X. He obviously knows what he's saying. So he makes 2 points that I thought were worth repeating here. He says Emirates, the airline, says Emirates isn't an airline, it's Dubai's foreign policy. It's national soft power. That's the level of excellence maintained because it knows that it showcases what the nation stands for. Dubai, Doha, Abu Dhabi have built aviation hubs as national economic engines, not as real estate jackpots, as is happening in India, or to extract more and more user charges or from people. Similarly, Singapore Airlines, he points out, remember Singapore Airlines is repeatedly voted as among the best in the world or the best in the world because the country treats the airline as part of nation building. It doesn't treat it like a cow to be milked dry for ATF taxes, says Murthy, and I completely agree. In contrast, look at what we do. Apart from these high taxes and charges, India hobbles its carriers with populist schemes like Udan. So we are all thrilled. Ude Desh ka aam nagrik. How? Because the government decided, as though they're giving subsidies during an election, that they will cap fares on certain routes to unprofitable levels. So what happens? People don't fly. You cannot force private carriers to fly. You cannot force these ridiculous subsidies on them because you want to build airports. Why are you pretending to build airports when you don't have people who have the money to pay? Because you want to show vikas. And then what happens? Those airports are money wasted, national money wasted, and not a single aircraft is able to land there. In fact, Udan is a miserable failure. Parliament itself was told, and the Minister for Civil Aviation admitted that of the 619 Udan routes that were launched, only 323 remain active, while 114 were discontinued within 3 years. So all this in experimentation also costs private airlines, costs the country, wasted airports lying like ghost airports because there's no plane to land unless some private carrier wants to go there. What does all this mean? We can keep ranting about this every time there's a problem, but remember, it is telling on the country. India now stands at a dangerous inflection point. A private airline has demonstrated that it can create an extraordinary crisis and extract a regulatory surrender. We are repeatedly told that it's temporary, and remember, the surrender is on safety issues after a crash less than 6 months ago. This is ridiculous. It doesn't show the country in good light unless the government response is swift, structural, and exemplary. Until now, we have news breaks, okay, news leaks. The government will cut down IndiGo's flights. They will do this and do that. We have to still see action because the message otherwise to monopolists is you grow big enough and the law will bend and the government will bend. Why? Because you hold the people to ransom. And you, the people, remember, you're never going to get compensated. You will be permanent guinea pigs of large monopolies. The episode is no longer about one airline. It is about the credibility of India's ambition to be considered an economic superpower. Unless the government fixes policy flaws and prioritizes safety regulation, real turbulence lies ahead for any of us who plan to travel by air. Because you cannot have a fallback option. You cannot book an air ticket, which is expensive, and say, I've also booked another one and I've booked a train ticket. That's not possible. So wake up, folks, and make sure that this time the government doesn't wait out until tempers have cooled, the news is no longer on the front page, and Indigo gets away again. We have to see it to its logical end, which means we have to keep the pressure up. Thank you, and do subscribe if you agree.